it's time to solve some radical equations. All that means is it's an equation with a radical. So steps, number 1, you're going to isolate the radical. Number 2, you're going to square both sides. And number 3, isolate the variable. And most important, number 4, you're going to check your answers. And you're going to see why this is super important to really do on these. To isolate the radical, you just follow the same rules as regular equations. So we should get rid of the minus 10 by adding 10. Left side, we are left with radical x. Right side, we're left with 12. So there's one. Step 1 is done now. Radical x is by itself on the left side. Step 2, square both sides. The reason why, hopefully you did the little review problems. When you square a radical, the answer is just whatever is in the radical without the radical. So the squaring cancels out the radical. So when you square a radical, you're left with whatever was inside. So x without a radical. And on the right side, 12 squared is 144. There's our answer. Our last step is to check. So I'm going to take 144. When I plug it back in up here for the x, I get square root of 144 minus 10 equals 2. Square root of 144 is 12 minus 10 equals 2. Next one, to isolate the radical, our first step is going to be to divide by 7, since the 7 is not under the radical. It's being multiplied with the radical, so we're going to divide by it. So 7 gets canceled out. The radical is now isolated. And 35 divided by 7 is 5. So we've done step 1. Step 2 is to square both sides. Sorry if you can hear my dog over here. Square both sides. So on the left side, we're left with y minus 2 without the radical. Right side, we're left with 25. Now isolate the letter. So add 2 to both sides. Y equals 27. If I plug 27 back in, because I still have to do step 4, if I plug 27 back into the original equation, I have this. 27 minus 2 is 25. Radical 25 is 5. So this really says 7 times 5, which does equal 35. So you're definitely allowed to use mental math. Just please be careful. Try your next example. Pause it if you want to, and then come back. So we should first subtract 14. So we're left with 2 times radical x plus 8 equals 20 minus 14 is 6. Next step, divide by 2. Radical x plus 8 equals 3. Next step, square both sides. So x plus 8 without a radical equals 9. Last step, subtract 8. X equals 1. Let's check it. So we're going to take 1 and plug it back in for the x up here. So this says 14 plus 2 radical 1 plus 8 is 9. So I'm just going to make that a radical 9. Square root of 9 is 3. So this really says 14 plus 2 times 3. Well, 2 times 3 is 6. So 14 plus 6 equals 20. So it does work. The next example is odd because it has 2 radicals. But if you notice, they're both isolated, I guess you could say, because there's nothing outside of the radicals. So we can jump right to step 2 and square both sides. Because when we square both sides, that's going to wipe out both radicals. Right, now we just have to solve the equation. We have x's on both sides. I'm going to subtract 2x from both sides. So that leaves 4 equals 5x minus 6. I'm going to add 6 to both sides. 10 equals 5x, which means x equals 2. All right, I'm going to do some mental math on this one. So if I go back up to the left side, 2 times 2 is 4, plus 4 is 8. So the left side is radical 8. Right side, if I take 2 again, put it in for x, 7 times 2 is 14, minus 6 is also 8. Radical 8 does equal radical 8. They're not perfect squares, that's okay, we know they're equal. That's all that matters. Last one, so we're going to isolate the radical first. So let's see, radical 6 minus 10 is negative 4. We're going to go ahead and follow the rules. We've got the radical isolated, so I'm going to square both sides. So when I square the left side, I have 2x plus 6 with no radical. Negative 4 times itself is 16. I'm going to use the easy part, right? Subtract 6. So x equals 10. X equals 5. All right. Here's why number 4 is so important, because if we take that 5 and we plug it back in, we are going to get, and the radical, let's just do the radical mentally. So 2 times 5 is 10. 10 plus 6 is 16. When I do the square root of 16, I get 4, which does not equal 6. So you might be saying, well, 10 plus negative 4 equals 6. But when we plugged in 5, we're assuming that's our solution and that it will work no matter what. So this is actually a no solution.